Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Move AI from Pilot to Production, a Fireside Chat with Arhasi. My name is Amanda, and I'm part of the virtual events team here at Neo4j. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Chiru Bhavansikar, founder and CEO of Arhasi, an AI decision infrastructure company empowering enterprises with trusted, intelligent AI. We're also joined by Brian Nielsen, Vice President of Product Marketing at Neo4j. Today's conversation will explore how organizations are moving AI from pilot to production and how leaders are overcoming integration, trust, and scalability challenges to deliver real business impact. We'll discuss the role connected data plays in enabling trusted AI systems, accelerating decision-making, and helping enterprises scale AI with confidence. Before we get started, just a quick note about questions. We invite you to submit your questions throughout the session using the Questions tab located at the top of your screen. We'll answer as many questions throughout the session, and if we don't get to them all, someone on the Neo4j team will reach out to you directly, or you can send an email to webinar@neo4j.com, and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Chiru and Brian to get us started.
All right, thanks so much. Hey, Chiru. So glad to have you here today. I've been really excited for this conversation. I spent the last week at Gartner DNA in London. This was a very hot topic. I'm really energized and inspired by what you've built, and so really looking forward to the conversation. And so I'm going to kick it off with something that I think is topical and relevant to our listeners today, and that is, if you look at all of the different research that's coming out, whether it's that MIT report or what you're seeing from Forrester or Forbes, you see, just generally only 2 out of 10 AI investments that are in pilot are making it to production. And so, there's enormous pressure to ship AI that works. And as the chief AI officer for a company that's built around the idea of integrity first AI, I'm really curious, what kinds of conversations are you having now with leaders that you weren't having 18 months ago?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Nice meeting you. So it's very interesting journey over the last 18 months. Especially early last year, all the conversations we had were very focused on how do we really prove or some idea around what we really want to do with AI. That's the kind of conversations that executives wanted to have with us, and that synergy changed when people realized in 2025 that hardly most of the proof of concepts that even resulted in success did not see through production. And you echoed it well, there is a lot of articles that are coming out and the research that's coming out, especially from MIT, which says that almost 90+% of pilots never reach into production. And we see that, I had a customer who said, they executed 25 proof of concepts. And when I asked, how many actually you saw in production, that's literally not even one. And there is an underpinning reason behind that. There is a quote, I don't know who quoted this, but it really struck my mind. The quote says, the best car is not just the one that is the fastest wheels, but it also has the best brakes. Okay. So when we think about that, there is something that so much we can learn in a journey of AI. And Arhasi was founded with the mission called AI with Integrity. And if you see everywhere, Arhasi, this goes back even 3 years plus, when people were not talking about that. What that really means is we have always been advocating to clients that integrity is not an afterthought. When you get into the AI journey, it is something that you want to bring it to the table in the beginning itself. Then you are actually laying foundations for how you want to be successful and move to production faster. At the end of the day, if I cannot prove business value with AI quickly, all the pilots have really are futile, right? So it's very important to really keep that in mind. And then what we have realized working with enterprises over the last 3 years is that there is a specific operational discipline that's required to really build enterprise-grade AI applications and then actually take them all the way from pilot to production. And that discipline is what we call it as integrity-first AI. It's about how do you build and move those highly valuable applications fast while at the same time having the right controls in place. That discipline we actually categorized it and we call it as integrity first AI discipline. And that's that's a culture of the organization that falls into our mission, AI with integrity.
Got it. So maybe you could tell me a little bit more about that. So especially for the folks that have never come across Arhasi before, like just provide a quick picture of how the platform solves that specific problem.
Yeah, we came up with this thing that the discipline is good in terms of advising clients, but how about if we actually turn that into a platform? Take the learnings from the discipline and turn it into a platform and package it in a way that people can actually adopt it and embrace it and use and derive value from that quickly. And I was telling this in like one of the conferences last month in England, that when we think about what we enterprises want to do with AI, we want them to spend time in monetizing the AI initiatives and showing business value. You don't want to spend time in building rails around it. Like imagine our times, like, even when the cloud came into existence, the big data came into existence, people spent like years just to establish rails. Yeah, we are building this X data platform for the last 2 years before even realizing like any business value out of that. You don't want to repeat that mistake. You want to actually really quickly focus on enabling use cases rather than building rails around that. And we said that if we can take this discipline and make those rails available out of the box as TrustHouse.AI, then that really makes it easier for enterprises to adopt and go forward with it. What TrustHouse.AI brings to the table is threefold. First is it prevents risks with adopting agents into the enterprise in mission critical applications. Secondly, it helps you measure how well AI is performing over a period of time. And has there been a drift, I can find out proactively rather than being reactive in nature. Thirdly, it actually helps organizations provide complete traceability all the way from the decision to the data. It's the other way around. You may be asking, like, why not from data to decision? Because I want to see that how this decision got modeled and what actually really resulted in this decision, and from where I actually sourced all those data components to build this decision out. And that's literally what TrustHouse.AI offers to every enterprise.
Okay, that makes sense. That feels like it's more of a trust monitoring, but how do you actually get to trusted AI first? And this is recency bias talking because, again, I was at the Gartner conference last week, and one of the big things that people kept on talking about was context and the semantic layer and ontologies and your knowledge graphs. And so I'm curious, as enterprises have more and more data and AI is still lacking context, why then does the context become sort of the missing ingredient? And how do you think about those types of investments in helping organizations get to the trustworthy AI?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. What does really context means and why it is such a challenging problem, right? Context really is the unison of three things. What does this specific data means in the context of business? Where did it really come from? And how is it and how it should be used? Okay. So when you think about, when we take semantics, the policies, and then semantic policy, and then I would probably say, where did it come from, which is provenance. Okay, so if you take the SPP, semantic, provenance, and policy together, that actually builds the context around it. So in order to create an interconnected of these three things is a challenging problem. That's exactly where building the context requires interconnectedness of data. And this is where like the graphs, and especially like the being Neo4j being the leader in this world, really can shape that context well, because that's the bread and butter of how you actually create interconnectedness of the data. And this is the missing piece, like a lot of people don't realize. And something that I actually also think about and is the traditional model of data architectures, the raw layer and the refined layer and the gold layer, or whatever we call it, like bronze, silver, and gold, are relevant, but they're not as relevant as they were when it comes to the AI native data architectures. As AI takes the role of the middleware, as AI transforms enterprise applications, as AI comes in and actually take over the data pipelines, now the traditional data architecture becomes less relevant. I'm not saying those things are not important, but they become less relevant. Now, the new AI native modern data architecture, from my perspective, needs three inevitable layers. The first layer is what I call it as a knowledge layer. This is where you actually build context from the legacy systems and create that interconnectedness of the data. That's the knowledge layer. The second layer, which I say is the integrity layer, which is basically how do we turn that knowledge into more like a verifiable intelligence? Now, how do we establish the policies and the provenance and the measures around it so that now I can trust this knowledge? And the third layer, which I basically call it as diffusion layer. Diffusion layer is now having the knowledge, now having that I can trust this knowledge, and through the knowledge layer and the integrity layer, how do I actually diffuse it across my business applications? That's through MCP or APIs or agents or LLMs, whatever we can call that. That is the diffusion layer. So these three layers, the knowledge layer, the integrity layer, and the diffusion layer, I think is the new AI native modern data architecture. And the knowledge layer is where Neo4j plays a significant role. Integrity layer is what our vision was of for TrustHouse.AI. And the diffusion layer, we know, there are so many solutions out there actually really target that big time.
That makes sense. So what breaks when you're trying to deploy agentic systems or LLMs and you're not connecting them to these layers that you discussed?
And if we are not really looking at interconnectedness of data, what we are really doing is we are going by we are introducing a systemic risk into the enterprise. What that means is now I may have truth inconsistencies. Okay, I cannot trust my reasoning because some hallucination is like disguised as a reasoning, which is a really big concern. Like I don't even know whether that's the truth anymore. The second part is because the second part is it becomes very difficult to scale fast. I would be stuck in like a pilot purgatory problem forever. Am I going to prove like A and B and C and D rather than saying that I know how I did A, I took it to production. Can I reapply those principles across B, C, and D and move fast? So that is the objective that we want to get to. So because without interconnectedness of the data, without that knowledge layer, and without the integrity layer, what we will end up with is a systemic risk, which literally is giving only a perspective of the data. For example, if I ask a question, what was the for example, let's say, what was the revenues for the last 3 years? Okay, how AI interprets that, it depends a lot on the context. Okay, so what does last really mean from the context of this specific question, and which probably is driven by a specific agent, which is owned by a business unit X? What does last really means to them? is a different thing, because everything that we see about different people interpret those things differently. And how do we want AI to interpret consistently? And this can be sometimes people will say that, like, I can manage this through prompts, by very strong prompting. Yeah, great. But I mean, when you're in a system where the data is constantly changing, you are not there to actually change your prompts all the time, and the data changes, right? So that's exactly where, like, this intelligence has to be baked into the knowledge layer, and that's where the context becomes very important. And if you don't have a proper knowledge layer with the right context, then we run into a problem of systemic risk.
That makes sense. Where, within the three layers that you talk about, like, where does agent memory sit, or if at all? And then, like, how do you think about agent memory? Some people think about it as short-term, long-term, and reasoning. But I think that space seems to be a little fluid in how people think through it. I'm just curious to get your perspective on it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, agent memory sits in the diffusion layer, because that's where the agent lives. But again, what that memory are we talking about? As you rightly pointed out, is it a short-term memory or a long-term memory, right? If you're talking about short-term memory, definitely sits in the diffusion layer. If you're talking about long-term memory, that would definitely sit in the more knowledge layer.
Okay. So you've been on this journey for a while, and you've been providing organizations with better context and a stronger knowledge foundation. Can you talk maybe a little bit about sort of the journey that enterprises take? Because generally they're starting from a place where they don't trust AI agents. And then how does that look over time? Is there an aha moment that organizations generally meet where they finally start to trust AI outputs as being, accurate and explainable?
Right. So this is an interesting question, and different enterprises are taking a different approach. Now, saying that, there is a common theme. The first is what we call it as an individual productivity. And this is where a lot of enthusiasm is. Organizations treat this as probably not as high risk as everything else. What individual productivity is, how about I roll out a co-pilot or like some co-work kind of environment across my end users, right? This is fantastic, but this is almost like, the same aha moment that people had when Excel came into existence in 1990s, or Microsoft Word, right? But it's way ahead, like it's brilliant, but that's exactly where the journey is beginning. Great. Now, as when we roll out, but still integrity plays a role there, because I roll out, now I may be accidentally exposing my documents and the data across the databases, and key pieces of knowledge that probably was traditionally controlled by traditional identity and access management, and these systems may completely bypass those in quite an intelligent way. So the risk still exists, but not as risky as putting into the mission critical applications and transforming business processes. So this is the first step, what is called an individual productivity. The second, we call it a process productivity. This is where you find mission critical business processes and replace those processes with agentic AI to a large angle. And the final one, what we call it as an autonomous AI or an enterprise AI, which is where, like, now you have a swarm of agents running multiple business processes simultaneously, coordinating among each other, while at the same time having a very fully fledged integrity ecosystem controlling those. Imagine, I think the example that I give is, imagine I have a fantastic road. That road is basically what we can call it as the AI infrastructure, right? Like, all the foundations, like, whether we call it AWS or Google, or providing the basic foundations of the infrastructure. Even NVIDIA comes under the infrastructure layer of that. Now, and there are cars that are running on those. at a certain velocity and speed, and those are literally we can consider to be agents. And then now we cannot leave those cars running on the road without any traffic control system. And that's what we call it as an integrity layer, right? And the integrity layer, to be effective, needs to tap into the knowledge layer. Otherwise, it cannot provide integrity by itself. So that's basically, if you look at the ecosystem, so you have like the roads, and then you have cars going on the roads, and then you have a traffic control system. So it's well coordinated. When enterprises get there, that's called as what we call as autonomous AI ecosystem.
Got it. So I can kind of think about the personal, the process, and the autonomous as sort of like crawl, walk, and then run.
Absolutely, you put it out nicely.
Got it. I really like that way of thinking about it. I'm curious, and so before we started today, we were talking about a particular analyst, and that analyst and I were having a conversation about how you've got LLMs, and then you've got your knowledge layer, and ultimately your knowledge layer becomes sort of all of your corporate secrets. It's trained on all of your decisions, the not only what the relationships are, but the why the relationships are and the how the relationships are. And their comment was that this needs to be protected. And the reason I thought about this is you were talking about access controls and identity. And so I would love to get your take, because you're so focused on TrustHouse and the traceability as well as the knowledge layer, how you're thinking about protecting that training essentially that gets into the knowledge layer so that it doesn't get used by the foundation models, because as soon as it does, well, then it's in the public domain and you've lost your secret sauce, right?
Right. So it's a great point, and a lot of the times when people think about this in an AI context, and people literally like mind shifts to like cybersecurity, right? Like the traditional cybersecurity principles do not apply to the degree we think that they would. And here, what we call, I describe it as like what is an intelligent security. It's about how do we give fine-grained access to that knowledge layer to these agents who are not only consumers, who are probably actually almost making decisions as well. So now, do I just want them to be a consumer and produce a decision, or do I want them to make a decision? Is also a question, to what authority level that I want to give this specific agent. Okay. And those are determined by individual business units who are like just we had a terminology called data owners. You'll have agent owners now. And that's driven by the business units and the business policies. So when we talk about, again, we tell enterprises about, you need to think about integrity. Literally, when people think about either cybersecurity, observability, like that, when they say trust, goes way beyond that. It's not a one-time compliance. It is not like just a cybersecurity. It's not it goes way beyond. It's a complete an orchestration or a design and a principle and a discipline that you want to bring to the table, because you are actually changing your landscape. The whole software development, how the software was, I think probably after going from closed system to open systems, mainframes to the open systems, this is probably the biggest change that we are going to see in the software world in the next 5 to 10 years. Software evolved, but it evolved in a very orchestrated way. It was literally an evolution, but this is not evolution. This is completely like a transformation. It wouldn't look like how it was in the past. So now saying that the knowledge layer needs to be protected in a way by giving fine-grained access controls to agents, which means that the data model that sits within the knowledge layer, you need to have a parallel a risk engine of a data model that actually tells like how agents need to actually access this knowledge layer. a traditional IAM policy says that, okay, can you access X? Can you access this database? It doesn't tell you which units of data within that can I access. Right. So what we have done in TrustHouse is creating that 3 layers of defense called as AI risk engine or a policy engine. It literally takes, a lot of times when we talk about agentic security, people say, yeah, guardrails are important, absolutely, but that's one line of defense.
Mm-hmm.
There are other layers of defense that need to be considered from a risk management perspective. If we put the system in front of a CISO, the first thing they will ask is, where are your 3 layers of defense? Can you prove that for me?
Makes sense. You mentioned compliance. You talked a little bit about explainability, and it makes me think earlier we were talking a little bit about decision provenance. And so I'd love to switch gears and talk a little bit about that, because the industry itself has talked about data lineage for years. And of course, that's not a new idea, but you mentioned decision provenance earlier, and I'm curious, like, how that's different and what traditional data lineage was missing that led you to kind of evolve that into decision provenance.
Right. So if we think about decision that's coming out of AI, right? I mean, the way I would put it is, a decision is, how I actually build, let's say, an Eiffel Tower with a block of Legos, right? So now I take those, I can build an Eiffel Tower with the same block of Legos. I can build a fire truck with the same block of Legos. Okay, so these block of Legos each block can be considered as a data element or a data that actually supports. But I actually put together those in a nice fashion to make an Eiffel Tower. Now my question comes is, in order to make that Eiffel Tower, which exact set of blocks contributed towards that? And why did they actually contribute towards that? And how do I know that there is no hallucination? I really did not ask for Eiffel Tower. I asked for a replica of Eiffel Tower or something that looks like Eiffel Tower, but actually ended up getting Eiffel Tower. Okay, so how do you address all these questions? Is where the decision provenance really comes in. And traditional data lineage tells you how data flowed through the ecosystem, what changes it has undergone. It doesn't actually tell you like how different data components were put together to actually create a decision. And what we also did is, through the decision provenance, we actually trace back all the way to the source. Not only that, how these Legos were put together to build a decision, where these actually Legos were manufactured with a specific barcode for each Lego block. That gives me confidence tomorrow that if something goes wrong, I can really trace back and be able to actually get back to the better state, an ideal state, faster. We cannot say that nothing will go wrong ever. But we need to be prepared to be able to act fast and be able to get back on track if something goes wrong. How do you get there is where the gap is, how fast you can get back on track. Even if you mitigate all the risks, we can never say that we'll never have any risk. Yeah, so that's a gap that we try to address.
Got it. So I understand the promise of complete traceability. That makes sense. But just to make it sort of super simple for for me, for a CISO or a chief data officer, like, what does that look like in practice? What would they actually be able to see and verify that they couldn't see before?
Yeah, they're able to like map all the way from how a data actually went through all the way from legacy system, how each block of data not only got transformed and who the users are, but how those actually data points were actually put together to build a specific outcome. So it gives that complete traceability end to end. So it is like, you can think of it as like an advanced extension of data lineage, where data lineage stops at the data, and the data got transformed. Now we are actually extending that to all the way to the agents and the LLMs and everything, to tie it all the way to the outcomes.
Got it. So we're almost at time. So I want to bring it back to moving from pilot to production. If you think about, enterprises that piloted agentic AI last year, or rather they piloted generative AI last year, and now they're being asked to put agents into production. What do you think is one thing that most enterprises aren't doing today that's going to come back and hurt them once agents start making, more consequential decisions at scale?
Yeah. What I am seeing is literally the aspect of trust and integrity really is still an afterthought. Let's see where it goes first. Let's try to prove out, and then let's think about trust and integrity. And that is one gap that I see. Another gap, and again, that's exactly how organizations generally prioritize, which probably need to change when it comes to AI. The second aspect I also see is looking at thinking of when we say trust and integrity, literally it comes down to is it governance, is it observability, or is it governance or observability or compliance? And a lot of the times they think that, okay, we are not a highly regulated organization, so really some of these things don't matter to us. Whether I'm a regulated organization or I'm not a regulated organization doesn't matter if my customer has a bad experience with the AI rollout, or I accidentally gave away some critical confidential information to parties that they shouldn't be getting access to, or if I authoritatively gave an answer to a customer that is actually false, then I am at risk. I have a reputational risk, legal risk, and a systemic risk. So it doesn't matter whether I'm a regulatory driven organization or not, still the fundamentals need to be considered while you are actually embarking on the journey of AI.
All right, so one more question, just because, I'm thinking about your answer, and I'm thinking about when people want to be successful with AI, they're thinking about trustworthiness second, or integrity second, but eventually that's going to bite them because they're investing, a lot of money in these initiatives. And if they don't become successful, then ultimately, if they don't figure it out, they'll have thrown the money away. And so I'm curious, from where you sit, then what does an integrity first AI enterprise actually look like? And how far away do you think most organizations are from that today?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, the blame would fall on if the technology did not fulfill the promise. Yeah, so in order to mitigate that, and then even not only mitigate that, also if I'm an enterprise, I'm already investing my money on these initiatives, and I want to make sure it sees through the light. Okay, so the integrity first AI literally brings you those brakes to the fastest car without compromising on its speed. So you want to move fast, while you want to move fast with the right rails in place, and you want to invest time in actually moving fast rather than investing time in rails. So that's basically the discipline and the methodology that we bring to the table that helps you to actually minimize and mitigate risks as you move through the journey. This is not an afterthought. You don't want to have a discussion with the CISO at the end of your journey. You want to you may not want to involve CISO. That's totally okay if that is not appropriate time. But when you have a conversation with CISO, if you give here are the 10 things I thought about when I actually did this exercise, imagine how fast you'll get approvals.
That's great. I think that's a fantastic way to close it. Love the way that you brought back the car and road analogy with the acceleration and the brakes. Just a fascinating time to be in our industry watching this all evolve. Really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Brian. Pleasure meeting you, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chiru and Brian, for joining us today and for such a thoughtful and engaging conversation. We truly appreciate you sharing your insights and real-world perspectives on how organizations are moving from AI from pilot to production while addressing critical challenges around trust, traceability, and protection of enterprise knowledge and data. And thank you for the audience for joining us today as well. I wish you all a great day. Thanks so much.